This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Hey!
Happy birthday, Mega Scott.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we need is more drama.
No, you.
You.
I'll fight you.
Damn, Ben, I want to hear your answer.
Because it looks.
The only other thing is, if you know the player's read it and they're like ruining it for other people, hit them.
I mean, with all that said, if you sit down at my table and I've got a pool noodle, you know what it's for. Whistle while you work.
All that and more right now. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG and 5e and other role-playing systems and maybe board games. I don't know if you're into that thing. Podcasts in all the realms. Man, that intro's getting so long, I'm losing the thread of it. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am here joined, as always, or most weeks, with Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and the returning Dael Kingsmill. Dael, I have to ask, what do you do, this question in from Ronaldo, what do you do when you're feeling uninspired to write, but you know you want to push through on something?
I mean, this is a really terrible answer, Ronaldo, if I'm feeling uninspired. The answer is that usually I don't. It's a terrible character flaw. I'm working on it.
Fair enough. James Hake, as someone who has made a career of writing.
Same answer. No. Usually, actually, now that I think about it, it is kind of the same answer. It's just on a smaller time scale and maybe a little more focused. I'll go out of the house and I'll go take a walk. I'm lucky enough that I live within walking distance of a sort of natural wooded coastal area. And so I can go on a walk through the trails, hour and a half long, and then come right back to my desk. And it's great. I personally just kind of feel inspired by being in nature. I think it's really good for like the fantasy blood getting pumping, because, you know, every fantasy story has a big ancient wood within it. And I personally feel a little bit more connected to the world when I'm out there. And also, I think all the medical experts or whatever say that going out and being active will, you know, revitalize your neurons or get the blood pumping or some medical version of that.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fair. Shawn Merwin, I assume that doesn't work for you because you're always walking, even when you're writing.
It's true. It's true. So,
what about when you don't feel like writing?
3 answers. The first thing I do is I write something else. Right. If I hit a block and I know I can't finish this adventure because nothing's coming to me, pull up an email. Okay, I'm going to answer this email. I'm going to write this other thing. And often writing begets writing. Mm-hmm. The second thing I will do is just move on to non-writing work that needs to be done, whether it's physical labor or some other thing on the computer. Give yourself that time. The third thing I found is to outline. Sometimes when you hit a block, when you're writing, when you're not inspired, it's because you don't really know what you want to say. And sometimes just sitting down and outlining the thing that you're working on will give you that path forward to creativity, to writing the thing that you need to write.
Man, I'm taking notes.
Shawn, when you say physical labor, I couldn't get the image of you like going down into the coal mines, being cast into the pits to toil for a little bit until your creative brain comes back online.
Whistle while you work. I'm glad you did it because I can't whistle.
Neither can I.
Sound advice. I tend, like, you know, from a tabletop RPG, from a GM's perspective, you know, someone who might not be writing for a living, but you want to prep your D&D game, and you're just not feeling it. Like, I find the really difficult stuff to be the like crunchy, like, what's in this room? What's in the next room? What's in the 2 rooms after that? Like, there's a chair in this room, and there's a desk in here, and there's 3 guards, and they're going to be like, you know, just that kind of like meat and potatoes of the adventure. I find a slog to get through. And so we'll be like, all right, I want to write a stat block instead that I know will be relevant and I will need later. Or I'm going to actually draw the dungeon or I'm just going to go online and browse Pinterest or some Patreons that I back for for dungeons, you know, and stuff like that to kind of get re-inspired to go back in and do the meat and potatoes work. There is a slew of news this week. I want to get to some listener emails by the end, so maybe we do slight rapid fire news roundup, but saying that, it'll probably be all news. So strap yourselves in, enjoy. First up on the docket.
The pessimism is real.
The more D&D movie trailer stuff kind of dropped. I wasn't going to talk about this week, except that Luna tweeted all of us directly around some very sad news that there's, according to the directors of the movie, not going to be any sort of meta layer to this movie whatsoever. There's not going to be like I think Zach from I Speak Giant suggested a post-credit scene where they're all like, all right, let's come back next week and play again. I thought that was genius. None of that. Terribly sad. Anybody else heartbroken by this?
A dark chapter in American history.
It sure is. I trust Baby Sweets. I have to put my faith in Baby Sweets. For me, it's just a little bit like, it's not even that I am in love with the idea of the meta layer and absolutely need it. It's more that for me, as someone who loves D&D but knows jack all about any of the lore of any of the settings, to me, it takes it from being a D&D movie to being a Forgotten Realms movie. And a D&D movie is something that, like, I'm a fan of D&D. I'm not a fan of the Forgotten Realms. You know what I mean? So I'm sure it'll still be good, though.
Yeah, judging by the trailer that just dropped, it seems pretty fun.
If we're going to do that sort of meta thing, I wanted to actually take the time to do it right, not try to cram it into an hour or 2 hours and then make that work too. What if the D&D series that they're creating does that?
I really hope it does.
Then they have the time to make that work. They have the time to play with all the nuances of it, tell the story of the game and the story of the people playing, and really get something that people can sink their teeth into instead of just this one-off, little thing for the fun of it, but doesn't really use it to its full participation. And I agree with Dael, right? Baby Sweets, I trust Baby Sweets at this point. Baby Sweets is going to absolutely knock this out of the park. Did you see that Paramount has signed a deal with the two Johns, John Daly and John Goldstein, to make more? So they wouldn't do that. And this just happened. They wouldn't do that if they didn't think this movie was really good. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks cool. J Pizza Beat said in the chat that the Speak with Dead clip that they released, I don't know if that was the trailer. I laughed. That was really funny. It goes to my point about it just going to be a quip fest with the, I'm sure there's sharper stairs around here. But I think for me, that's kind of the meta layer that I think that's their kind of ode to the sort of table talk that happens around the table, where the GM is just taking every question that the players ask between each other as the question that's being asked of the corpse in that specific clip's example. Because, just last week, I almost TPK'd my party with a raging barbarian and his band of not so merry men. And it was incredibly intense. My wife took 20 minutes to kind of come down off the adrenaline after the session. But at the same time, we're all laughing and joking and quipping at each other during the game, even though the in-world atmosphere was like, a fight to the death, tooth and nail. And so I think that still captures kind of the atmosphere of a D&D adventure at the table, even if it's not literally the characters sitting around a table. So, Luna, I know you got all of that as you dropped in. So there's that question answered, I suppose. I don't know. Moving on in our quick punch up of the news. I just watched this morning Sly Flourish's chat show that he does on YouTube on the Sly Flourish channel, was talking about the D&D, the 5e Nexus, or Nexus 5e that's been announced by Demiplane. And I just thought this was super interesting, something to talk about, because something that Sly was pointing out, their big bombshell kind of statement that they said we could come back to them in a few years. I'm not waiting a few years. I'm waiting a few hours to bring this back to you. Is that it would be bad for the industry for D&D Beyond to include third-party content on it, especially in the wake of Nexus kind of announcing this 5e Nexus kind of package that they're going to be unfolding over the next little while, which will allow third-party 5e content to be used in a digital solution, D&D Beyond style thing that can include Black Flag, Level Up, even I would assume potentially, and this is not an announcement FYI, but potentially Ghostfire's kind of, alternative rules, homebrew rules, that sort of stuff. And it just made me think, I've never really thought of D&D Beyond as having like a monopoly. I've just thought of D&D as having kind of a monopoly on the tabletop RPG industry, but D&D Beyond is almost a separate thing from the game itself. It's like a platform. It's like Steam for tabletop role-playing games, potentially, if they were to open it up to more games. But anyway.
I think it was that way when it was a Curse product, when it was a fandom product. And now as the past year or so, that Wizards of the Coast has purchased D&D Beyond, and it's now no longer a partnership, but an in-house team. I can see the change. My gut tells me that maybe there was a time when D&D Beyond could have looked that way, when it could have been, as he said, bad for the industry with those third-party things on it. But now, not only would it be bad for the industry, in his words, it simply would never happen.
Sure.
The most I think we could hope for is DM's Guild integration, and that seems like so much work. Would never ever happen.
How do we feel about because D&D Beyond has become so ubiquitous, even before Wizards owned it, a lot of fans assumed that they owned it. Do any of us use D&D Beyond, and would you use an alternate platform if it made sense for you to? I don't tend to use it a lot, but I'm like just on the cusp of being a grognard, I think, at this point. So I don't tend to use the digital tools beyond like as a reference.
Yeah, I like to fiddle and doodle and erase and rewrite and things like that. I'm sort of a fiddly type of a player, so I like to use a character sheet. I have used D&D Beyond to play. I don't use it to run. I have a lot of friends or players who use it and who swear by it and love it. And a lot of viewers who will say, "Hey, can we get this thing that you've made as a D&D Beyond homebrew?" Which is a whole other bag of things you have to be able to figure out how to do. I'm slowly figuring out how to publish homebrew on D&D Beyond. That's not a promise that I'm going to publish any of the things I've written on D&D Beyond. I just mean that for some players who are using homebrew classes, I have done that. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I tend to use D&D Beyond as a research and planning tool more than anything else. It is good for that, if you happen to have all of the content available to you. But I don't use it much as a player.
That's what
I think that's a really... Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say, I have no memory of what I have purchased on D&D Beyond. Most often what I use it for is to quickly reference either a spell or a stat block. And so I'll quickly search it, click expand and be like, oh, no, don't have that one. All right, no, I'll go get the book, I better go get my physical.
Yeah, because it's like, I bought this, I must have it. Nope.
No. Sorry, James, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say that talking about the content that you own is a really great place to start when talking about D&D Beyond. I use it all the time, both as research and as a character manager. But that's because I own all of that stuff for free, because I got it for free when I worked for them. And don't tell anyone that I still have it. Apparently, they've never revoked my access.
James, this is going out public. Whoa,
they'll never see it.
It's a secret.
They'll never see it. Secret between you, me, and the other several thousand people who watch this podcast. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if I didn't have that access, which were I, not sort of subtly pulled into its machinations, I'd have to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have the convenience that I enjoy. And I'm not going to pay that. I buy the books already. I like the books. It's more convenient for me to have it on D&D Beyond than to, take the book out and reference it. But if that's what I paid for, if the book is what I paid for, that's what I'm going to use.
Sure.
Yeah. It's also very, sorry, go ahead.
You.
No, you. I'll fight you.
Yeah, you sort it out among yourselves,
Okay, so despite writing a 10-part series for D&D Beyond, I still have to pay for everything. And I use it all the time. I use it for research. I use it for playing. All my players use it for playing. We're integrated with Roll20 on it whenever we play on Roll20. And it's going to be useful, hopefully, for everyone when we get into even 6E, to be able to pull the things they need from that, pull the things they need from Nexus, from Demiplane, and have it all work together nicely. People will make up their own hacks to do that if they have to. And so I am just counting on it to all work together nicely. The only question I have about putting third-party stuff on D&D Beyond would be, what exactly is third-party stuff? Is, say, the Critical Role book that Wizards publishes, but with a partner, is that third-party stuff? The Acquisitions Incorporated book, if that had classes, it has backgrounds, it has spells, is that third-party stuff? Do we want all that stuff left off because it's not directly from Wizards? It's a question that, depending on business relationships, gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my understanding is that a lot of the stuff that's on D&D Beyond that could, like Acquisitions, was published by Wizards. Is that correct, or is that inaccurate?
That is correct.
Yeah. The only thing that's on there, I think, and it's funny because when you hit the drop-down menu and you see all the classes, I think the only thing that's on there that, as far as I know, isn't in a published book, and James, you can correct me, is the Blood Hunter, which is like slightly segregated on its own as well. When you hit the drop-down menu, it's like, yeah, it's on here.
Like,
There's three other examples, and they're all Critical Role related. And this is because of Adam Bradford, founder of D&D Beyond and founder of Demiplane, we've just been talking about, because he's kind of an iconoclast force of nature, and he had a good relationship with Critical Role. In addition to the Blood Hunter, there is also the Gunslinger Fighter archetype, the Way of the Cobalt Soul Monk archetype, and the Oath of the Open Sea Paladin Oath.
Right.
Those last two were published in some way, shape, or form in the Tal'Dorei Campaign Setting Reborn book after I and the team tinkered with them. So as far as third-party content on D&D Beyond goes, literally that's what those are. They're party in a third-party book. They're content from a third-party book that Wizards of the Coast had nothing to do with. They're on D&D Beyond. And I don't think Wizards is very happy about that. I don't know much of this story, but there was often contentious relationships between the team at D&D Beyond and the team at Wizards before they were one and the same. A lot of posturing that went back and forth between them, a lot of little power plays. But I don't know any more than that.
Info Bro, I think that's what that says. Sorry, my monitor's quite far away. Has said in the chat that Sly Flourish has said, since the OGL has gone Creative Commons, we should start referring to third-party publishers as 5e publishers if they're publishing for 5e, if they're doing their own kind of 5e translation, which I think is interesting. I think that I think we're getting a step closer with this Demiplane plan of what we were talking about a few weeks ago, which is this world where 5e becomes a shared language between multiple systems, almost like maybe this is a false analogy, but the Unreal Engine for video games. You know, lots of different types of video games are built on the Unreal Engine. Lots of different types of role-playing games could be built on the 5e engine, if you want to start thinking of it that way, and kind of thinking of those publishers as doing their own thing in some capacity. Speaking of D&D Beyond, keys from the Golden Vault, as far as I know, I think it's tomorrow it releases, speaking to the US time. I don't think Australia has gotten it early, even though I'm looking at my date and it says the 21st. I believe some folks, I actually didn't look too far into this because, as I said, I sort of threw the news segment together a little hodgepodge this week. Some folks were able to get access to it on D&D Beyond early if they pre-ordered through Wizards or through D&D Beyond. So if you've pre-ordered a physical, that doesn't automatically give you access to D&D to the D&D Beyond version unless it was ordered through Wizards. So friendly local game stores, is that not accurate?
Oh no, I'm shaking my head like, wow.
Oh, right.
It just seems unnecessarily complex.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing video games went through and are, largely still going through, where you need like a chart to be able to know which content you're getting because of which version of the the game or the product that you purchased.
Wait, hold on. Is chat saying the Aussie Keys of the Golden Vault is delayed till April? Is that true?
Oh, wow.
Wait, what?
Is it just the physical book? It might be just the physical book.
It must be the physical book.
Yeah.
What would the reason?
I mean, that we've had delays to the physicals constantly in the past, and it could be shipping delays or something like that.
Also, it's just life here on our distant island.
Yeah. It's the nature of having an island nation. Yeah, that sucks for people. Oh, well, I hope you pre-ordered through D&D Beyond. Has anybody here been able to look inside of it yet? I didn't assume so. But...
No.
Nope.
Cool. This was kind of a bit of a surprise announcement. The Tabletop News program, I think, is what it's officially called. It has two names, and those two different names are different on their Kickstarter page and on their what their Twitter handle is. But I'm going to be calling it the Tabletop News program.
What's the other name?
The News of Tabletop? I don't know. Honestly, I'm just going off my run sheet. Yeah. Let me quickly find I'll link the Twitter handle. Let me quickly find
I'm going to look up what the other
Twitter
name
handle,
is, because
right?
I don't like the first name, and I'm going to hold judgment until I see the second.
If it's an ad, that might be just to, get around someone having the at Tabletop News or something already.
Yeah, that could be true. That could be. In fact, rpgnews.com probably already has that.
While you're hunting, I'm going to take a listener question from the chat.
Please do.
I made a remark last week about Bloodborne and the mechanics of learning through multiple deaths. Are there any TTRPGs that explore multiple deaths and revivals? Check out Keith Baker's Phoenix Dawn Command, a card-based game where you level up through death. Very interesting game, worth playing. Also, Keith Baker, the man made Eberron, the man made Illimat. I mean, he's a legendary game designer. It's a good game. It's a good game. No one talks about it because it's not D&D. But that's the way it goes.
But you heard it here. Okay, so I editorialized the word program. It's just called Tabletop News. That's
better.
Yeah, that's a little sharper.
I can't believe you made the name worse.
Oh, Watch Tabletop is what the handle is, I think. Yeah, that was the confusion. Okay, anyway, Tabletop News. It's a program that is going to be hosted by Becca Scott and Carlos Luna, and appears to also have Michelle Nguyen Bradley announced as a host. So it seems like it's not so much like a news anchor situation, but perhaps different hosts each week. Brought to you by the Powerhouse team, Michelle Nguyen Bradley, Nathan Onderek, Adam Rady, and Katie Wilson. Please, if anybody knows these people and I mispronounce their names, please correct me. Because it looks like a Geek and Sundry or like a Dropout kind of thing, but I don't think it is associated with anything. It's just totally its own thing that the producers are working on. So it seems cool. Hopefully it's on a Monday morning.
A lot of those names.
So we can steal the news.
Yeah, exactly.
Scavenge it.
A lot of those names are familiar to people who watch Geek and Sundry and that stuff. I mean, they're all in that LA ecosystem. I'm excited for Carlos Luna. I really like him.
It also, to me, seems like it could follow in the legacy of stuff like SourceFed Nerd, which was, very rotating hosts, giving you the hot, fresh scoop of nerdy news.
I feel like every couple of years, someone is just going to try the new media experiment again and see if it catches on this time. Right? Geek and Sundry and Nerdist tried, but it didn't quite take. And they were, I think, mismanaged by their parent company. We'll see if this one does any better.
Amazingly, you can say exactly the same thing happened to SourceFed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were much more successful.
Same thing happened to G4.
And purchased much later and then tanked.
Yeah. And happy birthday to Becca Scott.
Hey!
Happy birthday, Becca Scott.
Yeah.
We're rooting for you, Becca.
We are.
I think it could be good. I'll look forward to seeing what they do.
Yeah, I think if it's very for nerd, by nerd, and there's not a lot of, parent companies with huge expectations, they'll do good.
That seems how it's going to start out, at least. Give it 3 years of success, and then maybe those parent companies might start to swoop in. I'm just kind of curious.
Sell the company to legacy media. It can only go well.
There you go. It's saying that it wants to talk about, it's the ultimate source is what it's billing itself as for breaking news on board games, card games, and tabletop RPGs, which is cool. But I have to admit, as someone who was really interested in the video game industry news, I always find it kind of hard to find relevant stuff for the Lorecast some weeks that's not just like, this Kickstarter's being announced, and this Kickstarter's being announced, and this product's coming. Like, what's not just like a product announcement, you know, which are great to do product announcements. By the way, Valley King Clan's Kickstarter happening now. They're great, but
the
like,
world of collectible card games seems consistently rife with drama. So hopefully that'll give them enough to keep, you know, track.
Ooh, a nerd tabloid show. Ooh, there's a nice little market.
Yes, that's what we need is more drama from RPGs and
Perfect.
nerd stuff. Yes.
They're probably kicking themselves that they didn't manage to get launched, you know, 3 months earlier, and they could have just ridden the wave of this OGL debacle because, you know, now that things are calming down, I mean, to be fair, I feel like the news cycle has slightly shifted where it's no longer after the Lorecast, which it seemed to be for the longest time, but it's in the sweet spot in the like 8 to 12 hours between when I write the run sheet for the Lorecast and when we record the Lorecast.
Exactly.
Tell me, Ben, which is worse?
Look, I don't mind it this way, but it's why I'm working off handwritten notes instead of a pre-written run sheet for half of this week. Kickstarter launching in March. I don't think they've given a specific date yet, though. Last week we skipped it. This week we're back for our Legends of Vox Machina roundup. We're just going to skip straight past this one because from Dael's expression, I assume you didn't watch it.
I didn't watch it.
Fair enough.
I've been busy. I've been sick.
Well, it was exciting.
I hoped you would talk about it last week. And I wouldn't have to admit anything.
I thought it was really good. I think just like season 1, every episode drop is better than the one before it.
And I know Shawn watched it because Shawn has been diligently doing their homework.
So about that, I didn't want Dael to feel left out. I didn't want Dael to feel bad.
That, yeah.
So I forced myself not to watch it just so we could commiserate and cover it in more detail at some other time.
Gotcha. Actually, all right, one point I'll make and then we'll move on. The thing that I thought that I didn't like about the dragon fight at the end that I chose to actually really like, and we can spoiler warning this bit, was that the dragon was absolutely indestructible, indefeatable, super dangerous, did heaps of damage right up until the point that it died. And any damage it took, it managed to heal itself.
Isn't that true of D&D?
And that's exactly what I thought. I was like, actually, you know what? Accurate.
I want to know if the Twin Rivers came back.
I don't.
Wasn't that a thing in season 1? Wasn't that a thing in season 1 that they were like, to kill a dragon, you have to look for the point where the Twin Rivers meet and do the thing? Or was that just for that specific dragon? Because I took it to be applied to all dragons.
I don't remember that.
Luna says the Twin Rivers did not come back.
All right,
Luna remembers.
Is it applied to every dragon? Or because I do remember that, but I thought it was a Thordak only thing. Or is that applied?
But they used it to kill what's his David Tennant.
That's where I remember it from. Okay, that's where I remember it from, is season 1.
I said that.
Yeah, okay.
I feel that I am being made to look the fool.
One last bit of news is just a reminder that, yes, the Grim Hollow Valakin Clans Kickstarter is ongoing. If you haven't, if you've been following it along, now is the time to pledge. It's sick. Books packed with more things than you can possibly imagine.
Ben,
it's a very dense
it.
book. Thank you. Doing real well here. No, I genuinely look. I don't want to commit another episode to it because we talked about it heaps last week. So if you're new to the Lorecast, go check out last week's episode for a deep dive. But it just those I cannot overstress how packed with content those books are. I think they're absolutely incredible, and that is all I will say on it for now. Because we have emails. At long last, Rob's question has arrived. A very thematically relevant question for the last 2 months. For folks who don't know, Rob was our editor of the Lorecast before Dante, doing the early episodes up to like episode 26, I think, or 24.
And we'll never forget him.
Yeah, deep Lorecast lore references to Rob. All right, so he's asked, and this actually was a question that came in a couple of times, which makes me feel even more guilty for not getting to it earlier. Gethin wrote a very similar email. David wrote a very similar email asking this same question, which is basically what would go into porting an entire supplement or adventure across to a different system. And I think at the time, they're not talking about Black Flag or something that's 5e similar, right? Because as we've seen so far, very little would go into that. They're talking about if we wanted to, do Valican Clans Pathfinder or Citadel of the Unseen Sun across into Pathfinder, or Citadel of the Unseen Sun into like something like Call of Cthulhu, I suppose. Maybe that's not quite the conversion that you would want. Maybe Vampire Masquerade, who knows? How intense is that process?
It depends.
Very.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what the setting, what the supplement was originally designed for, what game. If we are going from 3rd edition D&D to Pathfinder, you can just basically run it as is. Maybe tweak a rule here and there. If you're going to a completely new game system, it can be a problem because even if you're talking about worlds and settings, if you're talking about the fluff and not the actual rules, even the system and the world should be designed in a way that makes the game do what the game is meant to do. It should be tailored. So if you make a world for Fate, there might be intrinsic aspects being a rule in Fate. So you would then need to pull those aspects out and somehow make them work in a D20 based, D&D based game. And that takes work if you're going to do it well. So the answer is, how well was it originally made for its home game? And how well do you want to make it fit into the game that you're making?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I think Shawn hit the nail on the head. Really early in my career, I did some Pathfinder to 5e conversions. And because Pathfinder is descended of D&D lineage, it was tedious at times because you had to go through and very finely comb out references to certain checks and make sure that the encounter math was right, because 5e and Pathfinder monsters and traps and stuff are very different, difficulty classes and armor classes and hit points, and the damage values are all quite different. But because they're kind of from the same stock, ultimately, you don't have to change anything fundamental about the game. Changing, like you suggested, Citadel of the Unseen Sun to Call of Cthulhu is such a totally different world. It's something that I'd like, don't try and do that.
Yeah, but I kind of want to see it now.
Yeah, me too. That would be sick.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to do that, I would basically say, take all of the dungeon crawling in it, turn it into very sort of free-form narrative, and then take each big monster encounter and just have that boss be an incredibly horrific situation where you're basically not intended to win. Make it so that the crawling grave at the end of episode 1 is fully committed. Actually, episode 1 might translate to Call of Cthulhu really well because there's a ton of characters, there's a ton of NPCs that are with the party, and you're kind of intended to use them as fodder to really give you that dark fantasy blood and guts vibe. And so winning episode 1 by having, all of your characters and half the NPCs die, and then the next session you play as a few NPCs that are sort of scarred and traumatized and making their way out. That's a very Call of Cthulhu moment. You could make that happen. But you probably, the best way to do it would be just kind of do it on feel. Read the Call of Cthulhu core book and just kind of feel your way through it rather than try and do a hard conversion.
That's literally, it's because the tricky thing, right, is that we've got a lot of games that have sort of skills at the heart of them, right? And the more sort of disparity between those skills that are listed, the trickier it's going to get, right? Especially once you start getting to like Vampire 5e or whatever. 5e, what is it called for vampire? Anyway, and they start catering to more of a modern skill set. Or Call of Cthulhu has this very detailed, extensive list of skills versus something like 5e, right? And so you're going to end up with this weird thing happening there where the skills don't match up. And then you have to take into account the games that don't have a reliance on skills. Something like Fate, where you do kind of have skills, but it's very different in the way that it works, right? Or games where it's really not skill-based at all. And then it all starts getting really tricky. So what James is suggesting of really stripping most of the mechanics out of a story and porting an adventure across becomes a matter of being familiar enough and comfortable enough with the system that you're porting to that you can take the story and wing the mechanics as you go and just be like, in this system, I guess that this would be like an investigation check. In this system, it's going to be a matter of rolling, smarts and averaging the whatever, I don't know. It really relies on you being comfortable enough with the system you're porting to that you can just kind of trust yourself to make calls as you go. But if you do that and you are comfortable with the system that you're porting to, then porting an adventure really just becomes a matter of keeping the story in mind, which is it's neat because it's a little bit less work. Monsters, that gets tricky, but
But also understanding what the game is expecting you to do in gameplay, right? If you try to take a D&D game where there's combat, and do something like Call of Cthulhu, where one combat is generally the end of a character, that's not going to easily port over. So you will have to juggle. You will have to make all sorts of changes to the expectation of the flow of the adventure and the encounter types before you even start to think about mechanics.
And also making sure that the players are familiar enough with this, right? Because if you get a bunch of players who play Call of Cthulhu, they know that stuff is there. Then porting an adventure across isn't as dramatic because you know that the players are going to try to avoid that combat. But if you bring a bunch of 5e players across to Call of Cthulhu and you just try to use a 5e adventure in Call of Cthulhu, they will die, and they will die quickly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think what I'd like to see, I've wanted to do this for years, but I've just never taken the time to really learn Call of Cthulhu. I've played it a few times, but I wouldn't be able to run it, especially because I've played it kind of scattered throughout the years. But I would love to do like a, from the ground up, Call of Cthulhu adventure set in Grim Hollow. I think that would be sick. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you navigate Novostoya and the Crimson Court, likely never ever coming face to face with the court yourself, as just a lowly commoner or investigator that's just trying to survive this place. I think thematically those things kind of dovetail very well together. Which leads me to sort of two questions. The first is which we've talked very much about adventures, like porting adventures. I think if we were going to port something like, let's say, the Grim Hollow transformations to be compatible with Pathfinder, I would imagine you're almost just reinventing the transformations for Pathfinder rather than like converting those rules, if that makes sense. And kind of wrapped into that, the second question being, and this was maybe more relevant a few weeks ago when 5e wasn't becoming as even more ubiquitous than it already was. What is the use of like setting agnostic RPG books? Because this question got asked a few times, and I personally am just like, isn't that just a lore book? Like that doesn't really, it's almost as much work for a GM to use a setting agnostic book to create a game than to convert a game from another system into their system of choice.
Do you mean system agnostic?
What was I saying?
Setting.
No, I do mean system. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
A setting agnostic setting book would be incredible.
It's like, there could be vampires.
Very avant-garde.
I don't know. You decide. This is your world. That's just every paragraph, every page.
God.
It's a lot of tables involved. The actual tables that you just said at. Okay, so there was when 4th edition ended and they were getting ready to start D&D Next, there was a book on Menzoberranzan, the underdark city of the Drow, that they made as close to system agnostic as I've seen any D&D book be. And so that's what it looks like. It's here is this place. Here is its social and economic and political systems. Do what you want with it for your rules. Do what you want with it for your stories. Play it in 4E, play it in D&D Next, play it in whatever. But so it's more of a storybook than it is a game book. It's more of a
storybook
encyclopedia.
Sans a plot.
Exactly, more of an encyclopedia than a game book.
Which still has a lot of value, a lot of cool stuff there, right? Like in terms of it gives you factions and you know who's leading the faction, you know who's the traitor, you know who's the whatever. It's like a chessboard being set up for you to use.
Maybe this is just my own opinion. Maybe no one will agree with this, but I find that whenever I see an indie creator pitch a system neutral setting book, I get nervous. Because a lot of the system neutral setting books I've seen tend to make a big splash on social media. Swordfall was a really big example of this, and then turn into vapor when the time comes to deliver. And I think the fact that they're system agnostic is it doesn't mean that it's going to be vaporware, but it's a pretty good indication that it might be. Because I think when you decide on a system, it really proves that you have like a mission statement. It really proves that you have a goal in mind, because oftentimes the system, like we've been saying, determines the goal of the game, right? D&D does something particularly well. And maybe that's a bad example because D&D can fit so many things. It slaps the roof of D&D. This baby can fit so many genres in it. But like you choose Vampire the Masquerade, you choose Call of Cthulhu, you know that you're going to get into vampire politics. You know that you're going to get into cosmic horror that no one's going to make it through to the end of unscathed. But if you're just kind of doing a system neutral setting book, then I mean it's like releasing a film script and expecting people to pay film prices for it. It's like, no, I want to see the movie. I don't want to see the script. I'll only buy the script if I love The Empire Strikes Back. Then I'll buy the script.
Sure.
Yeah. There's also the trickiness, right, of I think tabletop RPGs a fairly decent example of the ways in which, here we go, Martin McLuhan, the medium is the message, right? Like the system has a role to play in the story that is told and how it's told and how the story feels. And so you get to the point where you cannot just jam the system for Vampire the Masquerade into, I don't know, a super high fantasy setting necessarily, because it's, you know, it has skills that are set up for like stuff like mechanics and driving cars. And so if you're porting it into, you know, a super high fantasy setting where it's all horses, it doesn't work. And that's like a really like obvious and sort of brain dead example. But the further you go into it, the more you discover gets impacted by the system in question. And it's just a tricky thing, right? Because I feel like often the best, or not the best, that's not fair. My favorite tabletop RPGs are the ones that decide what their setting is, what their theme is. Not setting in terms of like lore necessarily, but in terms of place, time, genre, and then build a system to serve that. And so once you get into the porting game, and there is inherent porting that needs to be done if you're using something that is system agnostic, it just is a lot of work. I say that as someone who does this stuff all the time because I cannot help myself, but it's a lot of work.
It's like having someone who's saying, I'm an ideas guy. How about you I've got an idea, and how about you make the game? No game studio likes to hire those people because it's the making the game that's the hard part. Having ideas is so easy. And, that's not to say that it's not an incredible feat of writing to create a 300-page fantasy world encyclopedia. If it's really good, it's really good. But like Horrible Cabbage in our chat is saying, the cool part, the alchemy happens in a setting book when it's, how did we use these rules to represent these cool ideas, right? Saying it's so easy to say there are psychic powers in this world. It's much harder to create a cool rules system that makes you feel like a powerful psychic.
I agree. I think Dael put it very succinctly in terms of the medium is the message, because it's exactly what I was thinking, but not in those words. And we talked, a while ago, I think with the Dungeon Dudes, this was like 2021 episode. It was like the 4th episode or the 7th episode of the Lorecast, where I think Monty was talking about to feel like you're dual weapon fighting, you need to roll 2 dice. Just adding more dice to the damage of a single roll doesn't feel like you're wielding 2 weapons specifically. It might just feel like you're wielding a larger weapon. And I think the real real juice of a role-playing game, the moment where it feels cinematic, and to use maybe the word cinematic specifically, is when the mechanics and the story feel like they are absolutely in sync with each other. A fireball feels like a fireball because you cast it and then a whole bunch of miniatures get taken off the table and there's just a gap suddenly left in all the minions.
Roll a million D6s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it hadn't occurred. Like, I liked the idea of the Call of Cthulhu into Grim Hollow because the medium totally does change the message from you are heroes who will be able to, eventually bring light to this world, and changes it to you are, investigators perhaps who need to discover a way to survive this world, and there's a little bit of that in the 5e version as well. But I think it's an incredibly salient point that, Call of Cthulhu also has, I think, a drive skill and and like firearms skill and things that wouldn't necessarily be relevant to a fantasy setting.
Yeah, which you can shift. It absolutely can be done. It is, you have to be willing to seek out those little things that will impact the story and genre that you're trying to tell negatively. Hunt them down and get rid of them.
Case in point, I mean, Call of Cthulhu has been adapted by Chaosium to many different time periods, right? There's Achtung Cthulhu, if I'm remembering right, World War II Cthulhu. There's, I think
that's a different company, but
is that a different company?
Oh, okay.
That's
isn't there also
that's
isn't there
Modifius.
also a Call of Cthulhu setting thing that uses 5e? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well,
like they released an adventure using the 5e rules?
Right. Cthulhu is now open content, basically. So everyone is doing a Cthulhu everything. The best adaptation of Call of Cthulhu is the Gumshoe system, Trail of Cthulhu. It's a very good game for Cthulhu, even better than Call of Cthulhu.
Because it's all about investigating.
Yep. Yes. And I love playing Call of Cthulhu, but there's a better game. It takes the Gumshoe system, which is all about investigation, and makes it a Cthulhu-based game.
I think it's really interesting. This is tangential to the point that Call of Cthulhu is the most popular TTRPG in Japan, beating out D&D by a very wide margin.
I was reading about this recently, and this might be a very stark change in topic, but it is based on what James just said. I was reading recently about the culture of tabletop RPGs in Japan and how totally different it is because of things like there's not, you homes are smaller, right? Like apartments are smaller. So having a bunch of people to come and sit around your table for hours and hours and hours every week is not a part of that gaming culture. Instead, you're more likely to play. Yeah, you're more likely to play in public spaces and just one-shots, right? So one-shot tabletop RPGs are huge in Japan.
And so I followed the Japanese D&D Twitter account because I thought that would be fun language practice. And they're having a big event in something like Tokyo or Osaka or somewhere like that. And they have all of these like unique custom character sheets with very sort of manga style character art, and they have little standees with the same characters. And it's just like you said, Dael, it's very public play focused. And it's not like America doesn't have public play, but you're right. It seems like whereas Wizards of the Coast USA has sort of given up on public play being a core of their branding. It seems that in their Japan sphere, they're really pushing for that. I think that's so cool. Just the culture of RPGs in other countries.
It's super interesting. And it goes to show again how many different unexpected elements can impact the stories that you tell with these games, right? So we've been talking about it with the system, but look how it reaches out beyond the game.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a little bit of time left. So let us answer. Let's go Hannes's question. I think that's how you pronounce it. I apologize, Hannes, if I'm incorrect. How do you surprise a player at your table if they have either read or DM'd the adventure you are running already, assuming that it's a pre-written adventure? Or, as happened to me, a homebrew adventure that I was running for two separate groups at the same time that had the same player in both groups at one point in time. That was fun. Anyway, what are your answers?
Damn, Ben, I want to hear your answer.
Change things to amuse that one player and slightly subvert expectations. And then when it comes to a big kind of crossroads point in the story, that one player goes, "Now we're going this way because I know what's that way."
Done and dusted.
I feel like there are a couple of really sort of standout things in my head. The first is you'd be surprised how much the story changes just based on the group of players. The second thing is, if that one NPC is going to betray them, pick a different NPC to be the traitor, like just little changes that, it shouldn't be too tricky to pull off. The third thing that comes to mind that may not immediately be obvious is pull that player in to help pull off the trick on the rest of the players. You know what I mean? Like they know what's going to happen. So be like, hey, if you could lay the groundwork, plant some seeds, help me trick them, bring them in onto your side. It's delightful watching other people be shocked. So I think you'd be surprised how many players don't want to wreck it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also important. I think we've covered it a bit, but I'll say it outright. Ask the player what they want. Do they want it changed? Or are they just there to see how the story plays out for the other folks and they just want to sit back and see how the other players handle it? Then don't change a thing. Just let it play out as it would, and the player may be shocked at, even though you didn't change anything, how different the story was.
Shockweb in the chat makes a point about, if you're adapting a pre-written adventure into your homebrew world, then the adventure will naturally just kind of change. And that's happened to me where I've run a pre-written adventure and said, just say to the player, please try to have no expectations. Some stuff is going to be the same, but some stuff is definitely going to be similar. Different, I should say. And so, try not to expect something to go a certain way in either direction, even if it turns out the same or not. The other little trick, the circumstance of this that I had was when I wrote an adventure with one of the players that I was playtesting it with. So they deliberately played a Hodor style character who could only speak their name. Basically, that was Talaman, who's actually been in the chat this whole time. And so that was a way for them to be able to feel like, I think they were playing a barbarian, and they could feel like they were part of the game. Unity, that was the character's name. They were part of the game, but they weren't spoiling puzzles or making big decisions on behalf of the party.
Unity is such a good name for a character like that, because that's their raison d'etre also. Unity.
I've had to play at tables with being DM'd by someone who was running an adventure I wrote. And if possible, I try not to tell them that I wrote it. But if they know, or if somebody tells them, I just pull them aside and say, just run it any way you want. I'm not here judging you about it. Have fun. And if the DM seems nervous, I will just be the instigator. I will be the one that brings the plot to us and do the silly things that gets my character in trouble that other people then have to rescue. The only other thing is, if the player's read it and they're ruining it for other people, hit them. We at the Eldritch Lorecast do not advocate for physical violence against players unless they deserve it.
You know what though? Get just a pool noodle or something.
Mm-hmm.
Just a light bop. Great.
I'm just having a flashback to
A spray bottle. Stop it.
having a flashback to a panel that I was on years ago where we were asked the question about how to deal with problem players, and the question was really about like problem players that are, you know, murder hoboing, or they're, you know, trying to steal from other party members, or they're, you know, just kind of being annoying at the table. And the advice that was given just instantly escalated to call the police. And I was just like, whoa, surely there are a few steps that you can get to before it gets that far. Physical violence, you might not want to call the police after that.
You've never gamed in the US, apparently.
Right. Okay. That is true for the time being. All right. Dael, you look like you had one more thing you wanted to throw in there.
I was just going to clarify for legal purposes, please do not physically assault your players.
Obviously.
It's really obvious. I'm just putting it out there strictly for legal purposes.
We're Americans and Aussies. We can't expect anything from us. We need to be clear about these things.
Yeah, we have international laws we have to consider here, not just individual laws.
If the Geneva Convention is being disrupted by your play, you may need some help. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's transcended.
I mean, with all that said, if you sit down at my table and I've got a pool noodle, you know what it's for.
Or a Shockweb calls it, my players call it my whacking stick. So there you go.
Gotcha. All right, I got to make a trip to Clark Rubber on the way home. There's actually, sorry, this is going to take up more time. I'm so sorry. Shawn, do you know what Pass the Parcel is?
Oh, this is important.
Pass the parcel. I have heard the term, but I do not know what it means.
Sounds so wrong with an American accent.
Yeah.
Pass the parcel.
Pass the parcel. James, did you end up discovering what Pass the Parcel is?
No, I very intentionally avoided learning anything about Pass the Parcel until now.
Sounds so wrong.
It does. It's Pass the Parcel. There's some alliteration
but I don't want
going
you to
on
do
there.
our accent.
Yeah.
Pass the parcel? I don't know what pass the parcel is. Tell me, Ben, what's pass the parcel?
You know how you have like I'm about to offend every American listener we have. You have words that help you get into an accent. For the American accent, mine is donut. I just go, donut, you know, and then I sort of slip into doing a very stereotypical, like, New Yorker act. Pass the Parcel is Shawn's way to get into the Australian accent. Like, it's just effortless flow into after that.
Pass the parcel.
Anyway, we're going to leave you all wondering. My name has been Ben Byrne, here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. And we will be back next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. And we will catch you all then.
I'll kill you.
He's got the whacking stick.
I've got that whacking stick.
Oh, dear. Pass the parcel.
Do you want to? All right. For Twitch only. Pass the Parcel is a game